Good morning, everyone, and welcome to International Women's Day. I'm delighted to be with you this morning to be in conversation with Eleanor Murray. As many of you know, Eleanor has recently taken up the challenging position of Associate Dean for Executive Education at the school. The theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. So Eleanor and I thought we'd have a conversation around embracing the power of being challenged. Just to introduce Eleanor, her background is absolutely fascinating, and her work, research and interests couldn't be more relevant than they are now. She spent over 20 years looking into organizational resilience in systems with a focus in healthcare management. So how can we take systems and make them more resilient over the long term? I really encourage you to look into her work. I was looking at some of the papers around perceptions of risk safety in ICU, which are absolutely fascinating. So Eleanor, I am delighted to be in conversation with you this morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, we discussed what we could really focus on and share with people in the university. And we've chosen this theme of embracing the power of being challenged. And where I'd love to start is going back in your life to a moment or a situation that was challenging that you are proud to have overcome.
Yeah, so I think one of my work-related challenges was when I started as an executive director of a hospital board. That was very much a situation that was new to me. I hadn't worked at director level before, and I hadn't really appreciated what a big step up it was from an associate director role that I'd been in previously. And when I started, I'd probably not done sufficient due diligence about the nature of the organisation and where it was at. And I found out that the hospital was under threat of closure and it had a 19 million deficit. And so really I was one of a small number of executive directors on the board. There were about four or five of us who had to work together to try to address this situation. And we worked really hard to over a 2.5 year period to manage to overcome the threat of closure by working with a huge range of stakeholders, MPs and local population, local groups and people to make the case for why the hospital should stay open. And we also managed to turn around the financial situation, which from a 19 million deficit through to a small surplus, with only making, I think, one person redundant over that time, because originally we were expecting to have to make a much larger number of people redundant. And we managed through various different approaches to actually prevent that happening. So that for me was a really big achievement, I think, to have managed to overcome those and very much working with the other team of directors to achieve that.
When you first found out you were in that situation, so that the role that you'd taken maybe was slightly different from the one that you had been sold or thought you walked into, how did you feel about that? Like, because it takes real composure to say, okay, it is what it is, let's move on. How did you deal with that situation?
Yes, I mean, I rang a few friends who've worked at that sort of level and talked to them about it. And the other thing I did, which I think really helped me, was I actually went on a programme run by Cranfield at the time, which was about being a first director. And then I realised that going on that programme and talking to my peer group, as it were, of other people taking on a directorship for the first time, that the feelings that I was having, the feelings of sort of apprehension and concern and worry and thinking, what on earth have I done, were very similar with my peer group, and they were feeling exactly the same feelings. It really helped to be able to talk it through and recognise that quite a few of our challenges were similar, and just in different contexts. So being able to discuss that and explore, how to approach it really did help. And then I built on that network really going forward. We kept in touch and were able to share ideas and talk through issues really in a confidential way.
I want to come back to that, the idea of a support network versus a challenge network. But another moment early on in my career that I remember very distinctly was the first time I challenged someone more senior to me. And it actually took days of preparation to pluck up the courage to have that kind of voice. Do you remember a situation where you had to challenge someone who was more senior to you and how you went about it?
Yes, I do. I mean, I remember this situation where one of the professors I was working with, who also was in charge of the clinical service that I was managing at the time, had told one set of people one thing and then had told me something else, so that we basically had, you know, different perspectives on the situation, which actually was very problematic. It caused a number of subsequent problems going forward. And it did take a lot of courage to go and sort of challenge him about that and explore why he'd given us different information and approached us differently. And I remember, yes, being in trepidation as I had to catch the bus to the other hospital site to go and have the conversation. I remember being sort of very nervous about it. But I found that once I had the conversation and I was reasonably upfront about it and open to hearing his side of the story as well, we managed to talk it through and overcome it. And I think he had more respect for me subsequently, having challenged him and him being aware that I wasn't happy about that situation, and that I'd actually raised it with him and addressed it with him, I think gave me more credibility in the longer term.
Yeah, it can really create a shift in the dynamic between two people once the conversation's been had. So you've taken on this new role as Associate Dean for Executive Education. Before that, you were a Senior Fellow in Practice, so it's a real shift. I thought it's actually an opportunity, and I'd love to hear this, why you took the role. What was, I mean, it's a challenging role at the best of times, but especially right now when executives can't travel and there's so much change happening around executive education. So what pulled you into this role?
I do love a challenge. So I think I sometimes maybe take things on and then have second thoughts afterwards, but not that I have in this case, I should say. But yeah, I do really enjoy a challenge. I enjoy working with teams to try and overcome challenges as well. I really enjoy working collaboratively. I think that's a real key to how I work, and I've felt really re-energized doing this role because it's meant that I've had the opportunity to work with a fantastic team who, you know, are really enthusiastic and really keen to see how we can innovate and really meet the requirements of clients as they're changing in this current period. So for me, that was really exciting to have that opportunity. I also really enjoy working in complexity, and this role is extremely complex. There's many different stakeholders, both internal and external. There's the challenge, and drawing on Jonathan Trevor's work here, there's the challenge of achieving alignment across all those different stakeholders and across the sort of structures and organisation that we're working with. And I love having that opportunity to try to align things in complex situations, so that we're sort of working in a common direction of travel, really.
And why do you, not everyone loves complex situations, so what is it about the complexity that it sounds like you enjoy, that you actually thrive in that type of environment?
Yes, it's hard to express. I think I find working with people endlessly fascinating. I love, you know, hearing what people have to say, how they work. I really enjoy hearing from clients, you know, their challenges they face in organisations, and then thinking with the team I'm working with, you know, well, how can we address those challenges? How can we keep executive education really relevant? So all of those elements, I think, come into it in terms of getting that enjoyment from it.
And you've got a large team that across different departments, many moving pieces, and then sort of a very wide range of clients. How do you encourage people to challenge you? So now that you're in the leadership position, how do you really open that door so you hear what you need to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I've always welcomed challenge. I think it's a healthy way to operate, is to if you're willing to challenge others, being open to challenge yourself. I invite challenge, so I invite people to, say, what do you think of this idea? This is an idea I've had, but what do you think about it? Would it work? What do you think would be the problems with it? What are the barriers potentially that we'd have to overcome to achieve it? Why wouldn't it work? I think when you're a leader working through change process, going through a process of change, I've learned over the years that it's really important to hear the dissenting voices and to hear from people who have maybe worked in the area a long time, and they know from experience what will and won't work, or what will be very difficult to address. So I've learned to embrace those dissenting voices, really, and listen to people, hear from the critics, seek out the most ardent critics in a situation and invite their feedback and invite their perspective on the situation. And I think then you can, at least then you clear what you're working with in moving the change, trying to move the change forward.
I find it interesting with those dissenting voices that often can be the loudest critics. What they initially come forward with might not be the real reason, sort of the root cause of what they're finding disappointing or upsetting, or what's really going wrong with the system itself or the culture. How do you dig beyond sort of the initial response, the emotional layer, to really understand where they're coming from and the problem that needs to be solved?
Yeah, so I do, although it's time consuming, I do always try and take the time to meet with people and talk to them and just hear their perspective on the situation, and try to understand what, the deeper issue that is making them feel this sort of sense of friction and tension about the situation. And it can take time, especially when you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders. So a sort of really important element of that is building good relationships and building and maintaining good relationships, so that people feel they can come and approach you about a situation, and have that opportunity to have that really open and honest discussion about what the problem is or what might be a problem, so that you can jointly talk about how it could be resolved.
And so, in terms of managing conflict, and you mentioned criticism, often people say they love feedback and they love to hear criticism, but then when people are brave enough to give it to them, you get a defensive reaction. How have you learned to really give tough feedback and also receive it in a useful and constructive way?
Yeah, so I have to admit, in terms of receiving feedback, I'm always keen to understand what could have gone better. Sometimes too much so, I think. Sometimes I sort of like dig into it too much and try to understand what I could have done differently. And sometimes I think I should just maybe not do that quite to the extent I do, but I do really like to understand what I could change or what I could improve. And I suppose I'm driven quite strongly by that sense of sort of lifelong learning. How can I continually learn and improve as I go along? What new information or new experiences could I take on board? So I'm strongly driven by that. In terms of giving feedback, I think the people as I work with teams and get to know them, I try to be honest and upfront with them about what's working really well, and I try to really, take time to give people positive feedback about what's going well. And sometimes that's balanced with, what could have been done differently or how we could have done it differently. I do my best to try and have a conversation about that, so that we can explore it together. And often I've learned over the years to be in listening mode and recognize that there might be a whole range of issues around the situation that might have influenced why people did something in a particular way, that it's important to understand and not make assumptions about that. So I do my best to try to ensure that I've listened, and once I've given some feedback, I listen and understand why people feel it might have happened.
It's amazing how dangerous assumptions can be in feedback situations. I think that's something I've definitely learned over the years, often the hard way. when we were physically together in the school, we were actually a few doors down from one another.
Yeah.
And we didn't always get to see each other that much. But my experience of you, your door was often always open. You were always warm and empathetic and very present. And you've used the words collaborative to describe yourself. But I'm interested, what is something that people get wrong about you?
I think sometimes, because I'm fairly easygoing, people sometimes don't realise that I do have quite a sort of steely core, and I've got quite strong values, and I think if those values are challenged, they see maybe a different side of me, a more sort of determined, direct side of me. So I sort of, yes, do have a strong set of values that I believe in, and sometimes if those values are sort of challenged in any way, then people maybe see a more determined, direct approach. But that doesn't come out very often, but because normally I find I can move things forward pretty collaboratively most of the time.
And is there a value in particular that if someone steps on that or oversteps it, that you can feel that response coming on?
Yes, I mean, I suppose it's a sort of core of feeling like about honesty, you know, and being consistent and fair across the board with people in the same way, and being honest about situations and not saying one thing. I think for me that's the core that they get a more direct response from me in that situation.
And I'm intrigued. Andrew White was in this role previously. How many years was he in that role? I've forgotten.
Over 10 years, I think.
Over 10 years. So you're stepping into a role where someone was in it a long time, a relatively long time, and it was led by a male. Is there anything you are really trying to shift in the culture of executive education and the organization that you think might be more driven by sort of a female leader?
Well, it's a really difficult one because Andrew has left an amazing legacy, you know, and he has built executive education up and developed the digital element of executive education, which is what we're really like relying on and developing now. So he's left a very good legacy. I don't tend to think of necessarily female qualities particularly, because I think in some ways Andrew and I have got some similarities, you know, in the way we work. I think we both tend to be quite entrepreneurial in the way we operate. So I think, I mean, for me, I enjoy being quite entrepreneurial and looking ahead and seeing what opportunities there are, and then thinking how we can maybe, you know, how we can deliver on those opportunities. So I enjoy, I mean, when I'm working with a good team, which I am at the moment, really, I've got a fantastic team. You know, we can really innovate. We can really think widely about, you know, how we might work and what's on the horizon, and be flexible about how we move towards that. And I think when you're in that situation with a really strong team, then that's something that you can really aim to achieve. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, maybe you might class being collaborative as a female quality. Sometimes that's referred to, but I mean, I don't know. I would say I do work in a pretty collaborative way. So if that is a female quality, then that would probably be it.
It's probably an unfair question because I actually hate those gender stereotypes of qualities, and I think it is. You know, Andrew had this very powerful combination of compassion and strength, and showed how these things can go hand in hand, and that they aren't this female quality. And I think there is a similar combination in you. So you mentioned this idea of people who challenge you, people that you can turn to in difficult situations to talk things through. And I think this is a really important concept. I first heard it from Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist at Wharton, where he said he feels with his students, they are encouraged too much to have a support network and a mentor, whereas he's found the most valuable thing in his life is a challenge network. Now, we all define them slightly differently. I think of my challenge network as the people that tell you where you're not quite where you need to be. So they actually, you have this very deep trust that they can be incredibly honest with you, even if it's something that is really hard to hear. I'm interested in how you think about your own challenge network, and if you're happy to share who might be in it and the role that they play in your life.
Yeah, so I've always been fortunate that I've managed to negotiate at most points in my career having a coach. And one of my coaches was Guy Lubitsch, who works for Ashridge, and he coached me for a while. And I do feel that enabled me to. I mean, he was willing to be critical, in a helpful, constructive, challenging way. And that really helped me shift my thinking in quite a big way, in terms of probably thinking about how to work more strategically, how to think more independently, how to take control really of my own career and what I wanted from it. So he was very influential in that respect. I have another coach now, Andrew Constable, who worked at Roffey Park, and so knows the executive education scene. And he has been, I trust him to provide me with that sort of critical questioning to enable me to sort of think about things differently and to reflect different perspectives back to me. And I personally really value that. I really value having that really honest feedback. So that's been really helpful, that coaching network and that coaching approach. And then another challenge network that I've really appreciated. When I started in the health sector, I was part of a peer group of junior managers who were all working in the NHS at the time, and we were going through a master's qualification together. And that network has grown. We've had that network now for 25 years. We started off as action learning sets, where we used to have regular action learning sets, and that was all about asking critical questions to elicit an appropriate sort of response. So that was very much a critical approach, and we've continued to support each other and challenge each other. A lot of them are now CEOs and directors of charities and other organisations. And we have a WhatsApp group now, and if any of us sort of need some support or challenge, they are always willing to weigh in and provide that. And we often phone each other up or have conversations when we need some challenge or support going forward.
Have you found that the type of support or the type of challenge that you've needed in your career and your life has changed as you've developed?
That's a good question. It probably has changed. Yes, I think when I was in my 20s, I was almost like trying to find myself and try to work out what my direction of travel was. I didn't know myself as well then, so I think I was still trying to discover what my strengths were and what I could bring to a role. Whereas I think I'm much clearer now, probably what my strengths are. Although I did have to ask my team this morning what my leadership qualities were in preparation for this. But I think genuinely, I feel like I have a better sense of myself. And so really, when I'm working with my coach, it will be for them to challenge me to think, take different perspectives on situations or the context I'm in, as much as how I understand myself really and what I bring to it, because I'm clearer about that now.
It's kind of, it takes a great sense of self to be able to then step out of it, and where you want the awareness to be more on context and situation than your own self. I've found is sort of where I need the challenge now, that it's not in me, it's in what's going on.
Yeah.
Around in that situation. So I can really relate to that. What did your team say when you asked them about your leadership qualities?
Well, they mentioned collaborative, and they also mentioned, interestingly, political, being able to navigate a political environment, because usually sort of complex multi-stakeholder situations like we're in the school and the executive education and the health sector, they are generally quite political organisations, and being able to navigate the politics is quite an important skill, I think. Being able to understand what all the constituent parties have to bring to a situation and their different views. I work quite as much on intuition around the politics as I do on evidence. I sort of balance evidence and intuition in navigating and trying to understand those situations.
Talk more about that, because I think that's really interesting, because often it's something you're told early on in your career. You're incredibly intuitive, which I think can actually get in the way, because you start to make decisions based on your gut and your intuition, and it takes time to realize that actually, no, you need information, you need evidence to make a really good decision, even if it's what your gut and your intuition really originally was telling you. How have you learnt to balance those two things, someone who is very intuitive with finding the right evidence and information?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one, actually, because I was probably a bit impulsive when I was in my 20s. I would feel, have intuition about something and then maybe act on it too soon. And I've learned to just take time to actually build up a really good base of evidence. And in fact, that's something we're doing in the team at the moment in executive education, is we're developing performance reports and other reports that enable us to really sort of have the evidence to hand to help with the decision making. So nowadays, even if I feel something intuitively, I always check it back against the evidence and make sure that I'm making a decision on the sound footing. I mean, intuition can often be very valuable, but it really is, as you say, it's about that balancing element. So I think as I've got older, I've sort of embraced evidence and embraced data a lot more, and really seen the value in data. And I've worked on quite a few quantitative research projects as well, where I've really actually enjoyed the whole data process. I'm working on a research project at the moment around NHS boards with Renee Adams and Ken Okamura and another colleague, and we're working based on the evidence on a lot of data. And I mean, even now I'm learning how much you can get from that data by working with colleagues who have that sort of quantitative perspective. It gives you new insights that maybe you didn't see before. So yes, definitely a balancing now.
I think the hard ones are when you make the wrong decision based on your intuition. You go back and you look at the evidence or the information, you're like, how did I not see that? And then it's so interesting to think of the signals that you tuned into, either because they were very loud or because you wanted to see that in that personal situation. So we're coming to the top of the half an hour. So I thought I'd end with a few rapid fire questions. So it is International Women's Day, so we are going to do a little bit on advice, and I'd love to hear 3 things. So the best advice you were given, the advice that you'd give, and what you wish you'd know.
So the best advice I've been given, I think, is probably to follow my interests rather than a traditional career path. I got to a point in my career where I could have become, and I was being advised to become a CEO from a director role. But I actually really took a step off that traditional career path and did a PhD, which was seen by everyone around me as quite risky. But actually that's led to a whole new career path, really interesting, exciting career path that's led to this role. So I'm really glad I did that. So I would say definitely follow your interests, because that's what really motivates and makes you passionate about what you do. And so I think that's really important. I think advice I'd give is definitely to build a challenge network. It's a really valuable thing to have. Support's important, but challenge is really important as well. And having someone who can be a critical friend and really offer up honest, genuine, challenge can really help you develop personally and to help you develop in your career. And something I wish I'd known, I think I wish maybe when I was in my 20s that I'd been a bit more expansive in my career ambitions and considered, I would have loved to work internationally. I mean, this is International Women's Day. I wish I'd maybe looked at opportunities for working internationally and more broadly. I think I would have really enjoyed that. Anyone who's at that stage in their lives where that's a possibility, I would definitely recommend be expansive in your career ambitions. You can probably achieve a lot more than you think you can. And working internationally, given that we work so globally nowadays, is I think, a really important element of that.
I would 100% agree with that. And I love this idea of really welcoming challenge into our life. And it's something I think takes time to realize that sometimes the people that push you the hardest in the right way, it's because they really care about you.
Mm.
And that's what challenge can really mean. It's not just finding the right challenges, but finding the right challenges can be really powerful. So thank you for being so open and sharing not just sort of experiences in your new role, but going back in your career. I really enjoyed speaking with you this morning, Eleanor. I feel like I know you just a little bit better as well, which is lovely. And to everyone watching, I don't like saying Happy International Women's Day, but maybe to leave you with this thought, if you could think about someone in your life that you'd bring into your challenge network, who would that be? Thank you very much.
Thank you.